Good evening, and thank you for being with us tonight for the Children's Mental Health Resource Center's webinar on cooling strategies and cooling plans. Tonight, we are going to be looking at how to use lifestyle interventions to address temperature and sleep disruptions that are associated with mood disorders, bipolar disorder, and bipolar's newly identified phenotype, which has been dubbed fear of harm by its researchers. For those of you who are new to CMHRC, my name is Elizabeth Errico, and I am the Executive Director. Our mission is to provide guidance and resources for the early identification and management of mood disorders, bipolar disorder, and fear of harm in childhood, and for fear of harm throughout the lifespan. We fulfill this mission through a series of programs and services that we offer, including our palliative parenting class, which has been developed by mental health experts in collaboration with parents, caregivers, and adults with a lived experience of mental illness. We have the CMHRC Toolkit, which is a symptom, medication, and mood tracking web app designed specifically for parents and caregivers to use. We have our monthly book club, our monthly professional discussion groups, and we have our Wayfinder custom support services, which include high-touch expert support for families and providers around diagnoses, around school issues, around transitioning from one provider to another, and around providing parenting support. Tonight, with me is my colleague, Jennifer Sevick. She is the clinical director at CMHRC. She is going to be fielding your questions in the Q&A. So if you have a question while I am giving the presentation tonight, please feel free to put your question into the Q&A. Jen will address it. Or if enough people are asking the same question, she will hold it to the end when we will be doing a live Q&A. For those of you who may be looking for a certificate of attendance or a certificate of completion and you are here at our live event, tomorrow you will receive a link from Zoom in an email that will contain your ability to request a certificate of completion for providers, a certificate of attendance for family members for a small $5 preparation fee. So now we're going to go ahead and get started. So when we talk about successful treatment for mental health conditions, we talk about a three-legged stool where all three legs of that stool are necessary in order for the patient to receive effective treatment. And the first leg of that stool is medications. Medications that are prescribed and managed by a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner or another mental health prescriber. Next on that three-legged stool, we have psychotherapy. This is a psychotherapeutic work that's done with a therapist, a social worker, a counselor, or someone else who is providing psychotherapy services. And the last piece of this very important three-legged stool is lifestyle interventions. And when we talk about lifestyle interventions, we're talking about low risk, potentially high reward, easy to implement at home at home interventions that you can use right now, starting today, that will help to reduce symptom prevalence and intensity over time. They are not going to be a substitute for all three legs of the three-legged stool, but they are an important and essential component of that. So tonight, we are going to be talking about a specific set of lifestyle interventions, and those are cooling strategies, cooling plans, and the use of light therapy to help address temperature and sleep disruptions. These often go with mood disorders, specifically bipolar disorder, and specifically its newly identified phenotype dubbed fear of harm. However, they are applicable to any mental illness, especially if that person is taking psychiatric medications that can interrupt circadian rhythms and can interrupt body temperature regulation. But because most of the research that we have available to us in this arena and in terms of cooling strategies is around the diagnosis of fear of harm, or FOH, because of its temperature dysregulation symptom, we will be focusing a lot of what we talk about on that. Now, again, lifestyle interventions alone are not a complete treatment plan, but they can help relieve some of the suffering and lessen the impact and intensity of some of those psychiatric symptoms. And best of all, long-term, using these lifestyle interventions becomes a building block of long-term effective treatment that can be used in childhood, adolescence, and developed as a habit that can be carried through adulthood. The best part of these lifestyle interventions is that they are not dependent upon a doctor or a prescriber of some kind getting you into their office, having an appointment, and writing a prescription. They are free, they are at home, they are low risk, and they can be started immediately while you're trying to get the medication and the psychotherapy lined up. Now, when we're talking about lifestyle interventions, people are usually familiar with commonly recommended ones, such as healthful eating, exercising regularly, having a sleep routine, and following your doctor's instructions when it comes to medication compliance. But there are additional lifestyle interventions that most people have not considered already because they likely haven't been recommended by a provider. And those include things such as cooling strategies and light therapy to support that healthy sleep routine. Now, these additional interventions, cooling strategies and light therapy, are tools that we recommend be used consistently as an integral part of long-term treatment. They are used proactively, they are used every single day, and they are used on a schedule. When used in this consistent way, these interventions will help you at home to lessen the intensity and frequency of the symptoms associated with these disorders. Now, cooling strategies is something of a misnomer. When we talk about cooling strategies, we are usually talking about helping the body to release built up heat that hasn't been properly dissipated. We tend to think about that in terms of cooling down. This can happen as a result of the FOH symptom of temperature dysregulation, where there's a disruption in the body's ability to release built up heat. It can also happen as a result of pharmacological interventions and medications that can impact the body's ability to sweat or manage heat buildup. But in truth, this term, cooling strategies, is really just shorthand for body temperature stabilization. Because overall, the goal of these cooling strategies is not to make the person cold. Making them cold is actually counterproductive. It would be confusing for the body and trigger more heat development, which can start the cycle of overheating all over again. Instead, what we're looking for is a goal to have the body assisted in releasing its built up heat. It's a support system for the body to be able to release that built up heat, return the body to a state of temperature equilibrium, which in turn will then have a positive impact on symptom presentation. So this leads us to our learning objectives for tonight. We're going to cover a lot. There are several areas that we are going to dive into in order to understand better these cooling strategies in light therapy and how they support positive mental health and stability. And the first is a review of what is temperature regulation and dysregulation, what it looks like and what its impacts are on mood. Next, we are going to be exploring the impact that temperature specifically has on sleep regulation and circadian rhythms. We are going to look at how to know when to use these cooling strategies most effectively and what those temperature stabilizing interventions are. We'll also be looking at how to develop an effective cooling plan. And finally, what some helpful products are for using in terms of implementing these interventions. We do not get any sort of financial benefit from making these recommendations. We have no relationships with the companies. These are all recommendations that have come from real life CMHRC community members who have used them and found them to be helpful in managing temperature and sleep disruptions. We're also going to be teaching you how to develop an effective cooling plan. If you are interested in being able to have our checklists and templates, you may want to check out on Amazon.com and on our website at cmhrc.org/shop. We have a book that will take you through all of these learning objectives, and it has custom-made checklists and custom-made templates so that you can help start managing temperature and sleep disruptions at home. And there are even plans for parents to use at school. Now, we're going to start with a quick review of temperature regulation and temperature dysregulation. And so the human body naturally generates heat all day long to keep us alert, to keep us active, but it also gets rid of any excess heat that it doesn't need throughout the day as a matter of course. The body knows it can make new heat when it needs it, and so the excess isn't bottled up and stored, it is released. And the brain and the body work together throughout the day, all day, every day, in everybody's body as a matter of routine. But when it can't regulate its body temperature properly, we call this temperature dysregulation or thermodysregulation. And when that's happening, the body does certain things which become problematic. And the first is that the body generates heat that's not needed because it can't really tell whether it's hot or cold. And if it is too cold, how much heat is required. So it'll turn on that furnace inside the core and not turn it off. Secondly, it holds on to all of that heat and doesn't let it go. It bottles it up and stores it for later, even though it really may not be needed at all. So the third problem that we find with temperature dysregulation is that the body's natural temperature rhythms become disrupted. They're thrown off, and the body is functioning counter to its natural temperature rhythms, which involve warming up in the morning to become alert and active for the day and cooling down in the evening to prepare for sleep. In those who experience temperature dysregulation, they have that oftentimes in reverse. In the morning, they are very, very cold. In the afternoon and evening, they become warmer and warmer and warmer, disrupting their ability to get to sleep. Now, while there are scientific ways of identifying temperature dysregulation, which measures heat escape and variability in skin temperature from the core of the body to the periphery of the body, when these are being measured in a scientific context, it very often involves taking temperatures multiple times a day on different parts of the body to compare those ratios to one another. It's not as simple as just taking a temperature the way you would if you were concerned about a fever. The truth is, though, that those scientific measurements of body temperature dysregulation aren't really necessary to do a simple diagnosis of temperature dysregulation, because the signs and symptoms are so clear once an individual knows what to look for. And these include red ears and cheeks that are warm and hot to the touch without there seeming to be any environmental cause. Heat can feel as though it's radiating off the torso. Many parents describe their children as being like radiators, that getting close to them, they can feel the heat sort of billowing off them. And individuals who have this temperature dysregulation often refuse to wear clothes or wear weather appropriate clothes when they are either outside or inside. And believe it or not, people who experience temperature dysregulation routinely often have no idea that it is happening. But when they are overheating, they instinctively reject wearing clothes, using blankets, or anything that will trap their body heat next to them. And so that could mean not wearing weather appropriate clothes outside because they don't feel the cold, or at least the cold doesn't bother them. We refer to this as cold tolerance. Now, a person who is in the process of overheating or having all of that body temperature sort of bottled up for them exhibit symptoms that are mistaken by observers as intentional behaviors. And they are even frequently mischaracterized as being choices. But these so-called behaviors are actually reactions to overheating that is happening in the brain, and then therefore in the body. And these quote behaviors, but actual symptoms, include things such as hostility, aggression, and defensiveness, misperceptions of threat in the environment, which increases their fears, anxiety, and can trigger the fight or flight response when it's not needed. Temperature disruptions also cause massive sleep disruptions that can include parasomnias, such as recurring nightmares or night terrors. And these sleep disruptions are extremely significant. As I mentioned before, the human body has a natural temperature rhythm that it engages in throughout the day, which works in conjunction with the body's clocks or circadian rhythms that influence our ability to have appropriate sleep onset, wake from sleep effectively, and also stay in the correct stages of sleep while asleep. And so this means that the body and brain are supposed to cool down in the evening for preparing the brain and the body to go to sleep. Part of what the supplement melatonin does, and many people take this to help with sleep onset, is that it actually helps the body and brain cool down and therefore be more receptive to beginning the sleep process. In a normal temperature rhythm, the body and the brain, as I said, cool off in the evenings to prepare for sleep. And then in the morning, they warm up to prepare for waking. This helps us to feel alert and capable of getting started with our day. But when temperature dysregulation disrupts this natural cycle and heat continues to be generated long after the body was supposed to get rid of it, it gets trapped, making it nearly impossible to wind down and to fall asleep. And worse, that built up heat impacts sleep quality, and it impacts the presence of parasomnias. That includes nightmares, night terrors, that often include terrifying imagery of pursuit, abandonment, violence, and seeing themselves or their loved ones in danger, being maimed, or at the worst, being killed. Those parasomnias also include things like bedwetting, teeth grinding, sleepwalking, sleep talking, and other parasomnias. Temperature disruptions in the early morning hours make it incredibly difficult for those with this dysregulation to be able to wake up. And even once they are technically awake, the person does not feel rested, doesn't feel refreshed, doesn't feel ready for the day ahead. Very often, children who have this disorder and this issue with temperature regulation will wake up in the morning and say that their legs don't work, that their eyelids won't open, and they are often labeled as being difficult, oppositional, or refusing to get out of bed. And parents see this as a defiant behavior rather than an indication that their brain is stuck in the wrong sleep-wake cycle, and attempting to wake them at those hours is nearly impossible because you're fighting the brain and its temperature and its body clock, which is telling the rest of the body, no, no, you need to still be asleep. Now, there is a complex scientific connection between sleep and temperature, but for now, let's just say, for the sake of expediency, that the research shows that there are links between the body's temperature and circadian rhythms. That means, simply put, if your temperature regulation system is out of whack, then your sleep is going to be out of whack as well. Using the cooling strategies and light therapy that we're about to go through each day, and that you have a ritual for cooling at bedtime, that can make a huge difference in how easy it is to fall asleep, how easy it is to stay in the correct sleep-wake cycle, to promote good sleep quality and duration, and make it easier to wake up in the morning. So, in short, I want to reiterate that we know that involuntary temperature dysregulation triggers what are misperceived as the behaviors like aggression, a fight or flight response, fears that are exaggerated and extreme, sleep disruptions, nightmares, and hypervigilance. So we've actually now quickly covered our first two learning objectives of what is temperature dysregulation and what impact does it have on sleep. So in order to treat these symptoms, we first have to treat the temperature disruption by cooling the body down, allowing it to release its built up heat, and to stabilize the body's temperature, which leads us to our third objective. How and when do we use cooling strategies? To effectively release that built up body heat and stabilize body temperature, we're going to have to do 4 different things. The first is to learn to identify when the cooling strategies are needed. Second, to pay attention to the weather outside. Third is to use light therapy to help reset circadian rhythms. And fourth, to use these cooling strategies regularly, daily, and on a schedule. So the first piece of that is learning when to use these temperature regulation strategies. And we're going to look at how we catch overheating. And catching overheating can be tricky because those physical symptoms we talked about often don't happen until it's sort of too late. When you're seeing red ears, flushed cheeks, a torso that is radiating heat, excessive sweating, and the like, when you're seeing quote behaviors such as aggression, extreme defensiveness, reactivity, oversensitivity, larger than life fears, then the temperature dysregulation has already been triggered. It is already happening. And so we think of it as heat is building up all day long, like the water in a teapot coming to a boil. And just like a teapot that whistles when the water is boiled, there are physical and behavioral symptoms that are in effect that whistle. But that doesn't mean that the water in that teapot goes from being cold from the tap to boiling instantly. There are all sorts of gradations of built up heat and the resulting symptoms that we can see physically or behaviorally that are occurring all throughout the day. But when that whistle blows and we see those behavioral and physical symptoms that are that whistle, what happens is we have to use what are called corrective cooling strategies. So when you see that symptom outbreak, what you're going to do is use these temperature regulating strategies to help release the body's heat. And in that process, you will be de-escalating the behavioral symptoms that are being triggered by that temperature instability. And that corrective cooling will bring the person back to a place of thermal regulation. Alternatively, we use the same strategies for what we call preventative cooling, and we're using them proactively throughout the day on a schedule in order to ensure that the body isn't holding on to built up heat, isn't bottling up and storing it unnecessarily for later, and that the body is able to maintain that temperature regulated status throughout the day. Now, as I said, we do these proactively. We use a schedule. And as I mentioned earlier, if you get the CMHRC book, it will have templates and checklists that you can use to build your own schedule. And we'll look at some samples of those in a little bit. Now, it is no surprise to hear that the weather has an enormous impact on the body and mood. It's something that we are learning about more and more as we grapple with the effects of climate change and global warming. And the Climate Psychiatry Alliance, they have a team of academic, research, and community-based psychiatrists who are talking about and investigating the impact of climate change and global warming on mental health. And they are specifically highlighting the connection between climate change and social and emotional well-being. They're looking at the long-term impacts of heat stress on the body and on the brain. And they're looking at the global trauma that is occurring as a result of climate change and the connection between that global trauma and heat and suicide increases. So this is a very real, very pressing global issue that directly connects to mental health on both a macro level, society and globally wide, as well as on the individuals who are living with these temperature dysregulated issues. On that micro level, in order to help stabilize body temperature and build an effective cooling plan, you are going to have to be keeping track of what the temperature is outside and what the local weather patterns are wherever it is that you live. And here is why. The temperature outside forces the body to make adjustments. And that is especially true if you are going from an indoor temperature controlled environment to an outdoor uncontrolled temperature environment on and off throughout the day, which most people do. Even leaving your home to get into your car, which is a new climate, to then drive to work, to get out of the car, to walk into the building or into school, inside for lunch, outside for recess, back and forth throughout the day. Every time we do that, the body's temperature regulation system has to make an adjustment. It has to be able to successfully detect what the weather in the climate around the person is and adjust the body temperature regulation controls accordingly. Now, this is challenging for all of us. When it is very hot out in the summer and we go someplace that is heavily air conditioned, we feel cold, we need to put on a sweater. The reverse is true in the winter time. But when someone has a temperature dysregulation issue and their body can't effectively manage those temperature changes, what's happening in a single day and can happen as a result of wild temperature swings from high to low is that the body cannot manage and it becomes dysregulated quickly. And that temperature dysregulation triggers the behavioral symptoms that we are trying to avoid. So to start with, keep an eye on what the high and low temperatures on any given day are, and take note of how big of a difference there is. The bigger the difference, the more behavioral symptoms you are likely to see. If you live in a part of the country or the world where in the spring and the fall and the transition of seasons, there are huge temperature swings, say it's 42 degrees in the morning when your child leaves for school, and when they come home in the afternoon, it's 68 or 70 degrees. That is significant. Anytime we're looking at a swing from the high and low temperatures of more than 15 or 20 degrees, we're looking at a significant challenge for the body. The next is we're going to want to look at the same temperature differential, but not just on a within day or diurnal basis, but what are they from one day to the next? Again, if you live in a part of the world where during seasonal changes you can have one day that's 40 degrees and the next day is 75, this is going to be extremely important because that radical temperature fluctuation is going to influence mood and mood stability. Next, we want to look at, as I mentioned earlier, the difference between those indoor and outdoor temperatures. Sometimes in the winter or in the summer, those differentials can be 40 or 50 degrees or more. If you're going from it being 15 degrees outside to being a classroom that is set to 72 degrees, that's going to be enormously difficult for the body. So again, the bigger the temperature differential, the bigger that swing, the bigger the disruptions will be in mood and in the sleep-wake cycles. It's going to mean more, quote, behavioral symptoms like aggression as well. So one of the ways that we want to address these is, as I mentioned, looking at resetting circadian rhythms. And the way we do that is multifaceted. But the first that we're going to look at is the use of simulation lamps. There are lamps that simulate this kind of light that we would be exposed to during sunrise, during daylight hours, and during sunset. When we use these simulation lamps as an alarm clock in the morning to simulate sunrise, as a sunset to facilitate sleep onset, and expose the person to those special kinds of light during the day, and we do them at the same time every day, what we're doing is we're helping the body to recognize when it's time to wake up in the morning, when it is time to be awake during the day and active, and when it is time to fall asleep at night. This whole process aids the body's disrupted clocks to learn how to fall asleep at the right time, to learn how to wake up at the right time, and to learn how to be awake and oriented during the daylight hours. This helps the body's clocks align to the natural sleep-wake cycles of the day, and it also helps to address the mixed messages that the body is getting from its dysregulated temperature system. So in addition to this light exposure that we want to do during the day proactively, we're also wanting to look at light blocking. There are certain kinds of light that when we're exposed to them, like blue light and white wave light, we wind up sending messages to our brains that they're supposed to be awake. And we are all experiencing increased exposure to these kinds of light from the screens that we use all day long nowadays. And so the result of that constant exposure is that we have, all of us, have disrupted circadian rhythms. You can't turn on the news or open a newspaper or magazine nowadays without hearing about the degree to which people are complaining about sleep dysregulation, sleep disruptions, feeling unrested. And part of that is blame that can be placed on the exposure that we have to these kinds of light all day long from the screens. Part of what happens is that our bodies naturally produce melatonin. And when we have an overexposure to blue light and white wave light, what is happening is our brain is not producing the naturally produced melatonin that it needs. Now, protecting ourselves from these lights is extremely important. And we can simply use blue light blocking glasses, or if you already wear glasses, you can get a blue light blocking film put on them so that it will block the blue light that is coming out of the devices. You can get a shield that will cover your tablet or your television screen or your computer monitor. There are apps that can be used on mobile devices that block that light. And it is not just important to block that light in the evening, because unlike natural light, the light that is coming out of screens for us has a cumulative effect in the brain throughout the day. And so what it can do is actually simply confuse our bodies as to when it is actually dark out and when it is actually light out, and what our body's rhythms are supposed to be in terms of when we get sleepy, when we wake up, and when we stay asleep. Now, blocking this light all day helps reset those precious circadian rhythms. Now, the fourth thing we mentioned was keeping the body temperature stable. So we're going to be using these cooling plans that we're going to create in order to establish consistency, to use these cooling interventions proactively throughout the day, to use them in response to symptom outbreaks as corrective measures, to use them as a part of a routine, and to keep our eye on the weather and the differentials between indoor and outdoor temperatures so that we can know when the weather is going to be acting against us, and we can step up our use of those proactive strategies. Now, what are those strategies for maintaining temperature regulation? There are countless ways to release body heat, but we are going to look at how they have been simplified into 4 basic categories that can help you figure out what to engage in when. And those 4 categories are submersion, eating and drinking, adding coolness, and removing heat. And we sort of cheekily think of that as the body goes into something, something goes onto the body, something goes into the body, and that something is taken off the body. And we're going to look at each one of them right now. And we start with what is absolutely the most effective temperature regulating strategy, and that is to submerge the entire body in tepid water. This tepid means not hot, not cold, just warm enough so that you don't feel cold while you're in it, and it feels refreshing. What this submersion does is it literally pulls excess heat out of not only the body's core, but the head, if you can submerge the head or rest the head in the water by lying back and getting the back of the head submerged. And what it does is it pulls that heat out and it brings the body back to a stable, appropriate temperature. So again, it's really important to have the whole torso submerged, the head dunked a couple of times, and that water temperature should be roughly that of an indoor swimming pool. That's a great rule of thumb. But you can do this submersion in a swimming pool, roughly 78 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. If you don't have access to an indoor or outdoor swimming pool, families have found that if you have a yard, buying a simple, inexpensive inflatable pool from a local sporting goods store or from an online realtor will allow you to get that submersion. In the summertime, it's an especially good tool for helping the body stay stable. Now, the next best choice, of course, would be to use a bathtub. Getting as much of the body under the water as possible, while of course remaining safe. We do not recommend that the submersion strategy be used by children who are unsupervised. So please make sure if you have children that you are supervising them and or are in the water with them. And although the number one choice is submersion, showers can also be very helpful as long as the individual stands underneath that shower head and gets that water in contact with their body the entire time that they're in there. It will still draw out heat. A submersion technique that is very limited is foot baths. But foot baths can be very effective to draw heat away from the core and then out through the feet for those who either can't swim, don't have a bathtub, are afraid of the water, or are in a place where they are unable to access that full submersion. Now, the next strategy is putting something into the body, that is eating and drinking cold things. By putting ice cold food and drink into the stomach, it cools the body from the inside out without making it cold. That radiating cool from the stomach is very effective at bringing body temperature down and keeping it regulated and making it so the body doesn't heat itself up again. Now, drinking ice water is sort of the easiest, most effective and simple and probably healthiest way of accommodating this intervention, but it's not necessarily going to appeal to everyone, especially children. And so the good news here is that consuming anything that is ice cold or frozen will do the trick. And of course, we don't want to encourage excess sugar consumption, but we do recommend anything from ice cubes to ice cream. And that can include popsicles, ice sticks, juice pops, frozen fruit smoothies, milkshakes, and slushies. As well as sorbets, frozen yogurts, ice creams, frozen sports drinks and juice boxes, you name it. If you can freeze it and you can eat it, it will work. Now, the next strategy is adding something to add coolness to the body. These strategies are very helpful when it is not practical, as I said before, to get into a tub or a foot bath. It maybe you're at school, you're at work, you're in the car, generally on the go. But these strategies can be very effective, and they include using cooling clothes and cloths that will actually use the power of evaporating water to cool the body. We also recommend frozen ice packs and gel packs. The gel packs are very useful because unlike ice, when they melt, they don't turn into a puddle inside your clothes. But adding this coolness naturally helps the body release its heat, and they're especially effective when put on the body's natural heat release points. So that would be the head, the neck, the hands, the wrists, the feet. Also, wearing athletic clothing that wicks moisture keeps the skin cool. And our last category is removing that built up heat. And the most important tool for that is air circulation. Anytime air moves across the skin, it will help the body expel heat, and it will pull that heat and literally blow it away. So as much skin as can be exposed as possible is important in using this tool of air circulation. And you can implement these by having ceiling fans going, oscillating standing fans. You can even use different kinds of fans that you can put around the neck, personalized fans that allow for that air circulation to be especially intense on the ears, on the cheeks, on the face, in order to bring out and blow away that heat. It's also really important to remember to keep hands and feet and heads exposed as much as possible. Even in the wintertime, footy pajamas are a no-no for kids who have temperature dysregulation issues because their feet are not able to release heat. We also use ceiling fans, as I mentioned, or fans that are oscillating on the ground. We want to keep those hands, feet, and wrists and head uncovered as much as possible. And that can mean not using blankets while sleeping so that heat can escape, and not using too many layers of clothing or blankets. What happens when we wear layers of clothing is that the air gets trapped in between those layers, and then our body heat gets trapped in there as well, and it heats the air in between those layers. That's why adding blankets, adding clothing can be very effective in terms of heating people up. But when you have a temperature dysregulation problem and you have too much heat that needs to be removed, it's very important, especially at night, in order to promote sleep, that blankets and clothing are reduced. Now, cooling at nighttime during sleep is sort of its own category here, because we can't engage in many of the cooling strategies while we're asleep. We can't sleep in a bathtub. We can't drink ice water while we're asleep. And so we have to really embed these temperature regulation strategies into the environment where we're sleeping. And so that, of course, starts with a bedtime routine, establishing a pre-bed cooling routine that oftentimes starts with a tepid bath or shower that lasts for about 20 to 30 minutes is extremely important. Getting that body temperature stabilized in the bath will help the body and the skin to manage body temperature regulation more easily. Won't feel the need to replace lost heat. And then while you're sleeping, you can go ahead and use a ceiling fan or a floor fan. We have families who they have a ceiling fan going, and then there are two different oscillating fans, or one oscillating fan and one fan that's being held steady in place, so that there's a maximum amount of air circulation. It also involves using cooling bed sheets that can help release heat, like ones made with eucalyptus or bamboo. There are many of those on the market, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes. And we can also use mattress fans like the BedJet brand, or cooling mattress toppers such as the Sleep Me brand, also known as Chilly Sleep or Chilly Pad. And you can get a sense of how effective these cooling strategies are that you've integrated into your bedtime routine by tracking sleep duration and quality using some sort of sleep tracking device. This can be a smartwatch, it can be a mattress pad, but what happens is when you use these sleep tracking tools, you are getting information on how quickly you're falling asleep, how effectively you're staying asleep, whether or not you're staying for the right duration in each of the necessary sleep stages, and when you are waking up. Using these trackers to help identify what, for example, you're getting in terms of REM sleep, will help you to know what kind of cooling strategies you need and when. So some parents, for example, know that they have a cooling bed sheet. They're using bamboo sheets, and they have the Doc Pro BedJet on their bed. And what they're doing is they're seeing that, oh, at this particular time of the evening, their body temperature is rising. So at 2:30 in the morning, we're going to make that BedJet go to a slightly cooler temperature to help that heat that's being generated during sleep be gotten rid of. And then they know that at 7 a.m., we're going to turn the temperature up just a little on that BedJet to encourage wakefulness at the time that we want it to be. So at first, it can be tricky to be able to figure out how to use these strategies. We do have support for that in our community. We have a volunteer who works with folks who are trying to collect sleep data and correlate it with their body temperature data in order to facilitate good quality sleep for good durations and to minimize sleep related difficulties. So, in review, these 4 intervention strategy categories are submersion, eating and drinking, adding coolness, and removing heat through air circulation. And when we combine with that the light therapy of blue light blocking and sun simulation, we have here a model for the go-to interventions that you are going to use both preventatively and as corrective interventions to deal with heat buildup, overheating, and sleep disruptions. Now, we are going to talk now about developing a plan. And as I mentioned, if you would like to have our checklists, our full explanation of what symptoms to be looking for, what to be tracking, how templates for building a plan, how to implement them at home, how to develop a sleep schedule plan, how to get them to your school for your children so that this cooling strategies can be implemented there. If you're looking for all of that and more, we do have a book that we have published called Managing Temperature and Sleep Disruptions. You can get information on our website, cmhrc.org/shop, for information on purchasing that book, and physical copies can be purchased through Amazon. So when we're developing a plan for cooling and sleep, what we want to do first is to remember that we are building a plan to include both prevention so that the overheating does not happen in the first place, also for correction so that in the moment when we have symptom outbreaks, we can address them using these strategies. And of course, remember, the more prevention you do, the less correction will be necessary, which is why we highly, highly recommend developing these schedules and plans. So for starters, you're going to want to just use some trial and error here. Experiment with what cooling strategies are going to be the most effective and the most tolerable for the given individual that you're building this plan for, be it yourself or your child or a loved one or a student. It is really important to focus on tolerability for the simple fact that if the intervention is not tolerable, the person won't use it. And it's only going to be effective if it is used. So on this sample plan, you can see that this person has identified that these are the strategies that are most effective for them. These are the ones that they want to use. They have been identified as either being corrective or preventative or both. And they have been identified in terms of their tolerability. Notice nothing on this list is intolerable. Everything is things that they are willing to do. And lastly, this plan identifies the effectiveness of each of these strategies. So for example, we can see that drinking ice cold liquid is both corrective and preventative. It is tolerable and it is highly effective. This format, which again is in the templates that we provide you in the book on temperature and sleep disruptions, makes it very easy to transition from one care provider to another. So if you're talking about going from home to school, or you're talking about going from home to with a parent to being at home with a respite provider or with a babysitter or a grandparent, it becomes very easy to be able to transition information effectively. So you spend some time figuring out what these go-to strategies for you are, and then you build a sample plan. So in this next section, we show you an example, which is also in the book, that of what a typical daily schedule looks like. That you wake up with your sunrise lamp, you eat something cold or drink something cold with breakfast. You maybe have 3 minutes of a daylight lamp at 9 o'clock to remind your body that it's daytime, you need to be alert. And then starting around 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, you start using the cooling strategies, using an evaporative cloth on the neck or wrists, having a cold drink, having a fan blowing directly on you for 10 minutes, eating a fruit smoothie as a snack, having a foot bath at the same time, taking a bath for 20 to 30 minutes in tepid temperatures, and making sure that you have all your environmental cooling strategies going before sleep. Setting this up as a daily checklist, which we have done for folks, combining it with some alarms on your phone or your smartwatch, actually makes it incredibly easy to make sure that this plan gets followed. And one thing that I will say is that we found that the families that we work with report back to us that the most effective way of doing this is to embed these things in the environment so that their children are experiencing these cooling strategies, perhaps without even having to think about it, which makes it even more likely that they're going to be followed through on. So obviously, all of these strategies that we've talked about involve using some kind of product or tool to go along with them. You don't have to break the bank, though. One of the benefits of the CMHRC community is that families have come together in order to share information and resources on strategies and products and recommendations that maximize cooling without breaking the bank. And so I'm going to go through just a few of these with you now. They can be found on our website. If you go to our homepage, cmhrc.org, and you look under the free resources menu tab at the top of the page, you will see in that list there is a page on recommended products. These recommendations come directly from families who use them and can attest to their value. And while there may be some affiliate links in there, as I said before, we do not receive any compensation for promoting these. These are primarily from family recommendations. So we're going to start with the Arctic Cool Cooling Towel. This is an evaporative cooling towel. You wet it, you wring it out, you put it around the neck, on the forehead, on the hands and face, and it pulls the heat out and evaporates it with the water. There's also this cooling gel color. This is filled with gel. You put it in your freezer. It freezes solid, and then you can put it around your neck, and it is incredibly effective at cooling down. We have kids who at school, they have a couple of these in the freezer in the counselor's office, and as their day progresses, they come in from recess, they go to the counselor, they swap the one around their neck out for a freshly frozen one, and they are able to have that integrated easily into their day at school, keeping them cool. We also have these portable personal neck fans that go around the neck. They have multiple speeds, and they blow air straight up the neck, across the ears, and through the hair. They're extremely effective and relatively inexpensive, approximately $24, depending actually on which color you pick. They have quite an array of colors. There is also magic gel head ice wraps. You can find these from lots of different companies online. Basically, it is a little hat that is filled with gel packs, and you stick it in the freezer. And when you have an overheating, either you're trying to proactively avoid it or you need to correct it, you take it out of the freezer, you slip it on your head, and it's very cool. It helps cool the head down quickly, and that in turn cools down the brain. As one psychiatrist I know frequently says, that the ears are the thermostat of the brain. So you can see what's going on when they get red, and pop this on, and it will help cool very quickly. Oftentimes you'll see these advertised online as migraine caps because they are very effective at treating migraines as well. For keeping items that you're drinking cold throughout the day, we recommend a slightly more expensive product, which is either the Hydro Flask or the Yeti. Many companies have these. You want to get a really high quality thermos that you can fill with ice to the tippy top, then fill with liquid, preferably water. And when you put that cap on, there's a straw that pops out, and it will keep that liquid ice cold for at least 8 to 12 hours. Some of them will last for as long as 24. That's very effective to be able to take water, ice water to school or to work and have access to that ice cold water all day long that can be sipped proactively and can be consumed when there are symptom outbreaks as a corrective measure. Now, those light simulators that I was talking about earlier, there are multiple different lights that are made by the Philips company. They are slightly more expensive. You can find them online. I know that we have some listed on our website that you can get on Amazon. Some of them are different shapes, different colors, different designs, but fundamentally you're looking for a sunset and sunrise simulator that will help reset those circadian rhythms as your alarm clock in the morning and as your guide to drift off to sleep. When it comes to the sleep tracking tools, the Whiting's sleep tracking pad, which is actually just called the Sleep, is one of the best and has been used in research studies tracking temperature and tracking sleep impacts and disruptions in circadian rhythms. So we do highly recommend this, even though it is a slightly more expensive product. The benefit of this over the sleep tracking smartwatches, especially for children who may have sensory sensitivities and are uncomfortable wearing a watch, especially when they sleep, is that this goes in between the mattress and the box spring, which means that as long as the torso is lying on top of it, it is collecting its data. It's being instantly exported into an app on your smartphone. You have access to that data. I know many parents whose children use these, who when the parent wakes up in the morning, the first thing they do is open their phone, look at their sleep tracking mat, and from that they know what kind of night their child had the night before, and in turn what kind of day their child is going to have because of how they slept. The mattress pads that are used include the Chili Pad, which is now owned by a company called Sleep Me, and the Bed Jet. The Chili Pad goes on top of the mattress, is a mattress topper that circulates cold water throughout it, which helps maintain your body temperature all night long. The Bed Jet is actually a fan that blows through the sheets on the bed, maintaining a cool temperature and providing that additional air circulation that we've been talking about. As I said, all of these items can be found on the CMHRC website. If you go to free resources in the menu tab, you can find the recommended products page. Now, the path to stability does involve other legs on that stool. For the most part, for mental illnesses as serious as bipolar, major depression, other mood disorders, and FOH, medication and psychotherapy is important. But if you are able to use these lifestyle interventions, you can go a long way to relieving the intensity, severity, and frequency of the symptoms that are experienced. So you can use this information to make a plan, identify your cooling strategies, set up a convenient schedule, focus on improving sleep, reset those circadian rhythms, and pay attention to the weather, because lifestyle interventions alone won't be comprehensive as a treatment plan, but these techniques do provide relief, and as importantly, they bring a sense of agency and control to the family so that they know they're doing something helpful for themselves right now, today, immediately, without having to wait for a prescription. Now, again, as I said, we do have our resource book, Managing Temperature and Sleep Disruptions. You can find it on our website. It goes through and provides detailed information on the impact of temperature and sleep disruptions on mood disorders and on symptoms. It goes through how to use these cooling strategies and other interventions. It has checklists and templates that can be used to personalize your cooling and sleep plans for consistent use at home as well as at school. There's even information in there that you can provide to your school on why your child needs to have these temperature regulating interventions throughout the school day. And overall, it will help you to cool down, sleep better, and optimize effective treatment so that you can experience stability now and in the future. These slides have information on the research and published papers that were used to support the information contained in this program, and they are also contained in the bibliography of our book. If you would like a certificate of completion for having attended this live event, you can do so. You will receive an email from Zoom tomorrow that thanks you for attending, and in that is information on how you can get a certificate of completion or attendance for a small $5 preparation fee. There was also information on how to get a copy of the book that takes you through all this information as well.